Lotus Elan 1962–1973. Lotus Elan is the name of two separate ranges of automobiles produced by Lotus Cars. The first series of cars was produced between 1962 and 1975 as a rear-wheel drive vehicle. The second series was produced between 1989 and 1995 as a front-wheel drive vehicle. This second model was also produced in South Korea by Kia Motors between 1996 and 1999, rebadged as the Kia Elan. The Lotus Elan was the first Lotus road car to use a steel backbone chassis with a fiberglass body. This style of construction was to be repeated in subsequent Lotus models for nearly 3 decades. At approximately 1,500 pounds, 680 kilograms, the Elan embodied Colin Chapman's minimum weight design philosophy. The Elan was technologically advanced with a DOC 1558cc engine, 4-wheel disc brakes, rack and pinion steering, and 4-wheel independent suspension. Gordon Murray, designer of the McLaren F1 supercar, reportedly said that his only disappointment with the McLaren F1 was that he could not give it the perfect steering of the Lotus Elan. In 2004, Sports Car International named the Elan number 6 on the list of top sports cars of the 1960s. The original version of the car was designed by Ron Hickman, who also designed the first Lotus Europa as part of Lotus GT40 Project Bid and made his fortune having designed the Black & Decker Workmate. Because of its successful design and rigorous attention to cost control on the body, chassis, engine and transmission, the Elan became Lotus' first commercial success and contributed to the funding of its achievements in racing over the next 10 years. It revived a company stretched thin by the more exotic, expensive to build, and rather unreliable Lotus Elite, which used a fiberglass monocoque body, chassis and all-aluminium Coventry Climax engine. The original Elan 1500 was introduced in 1962 as a roadster. After a very short production run of just 22 cars, the engine was enlarged and the car was redesignated the Elan 1600. An optional hardtop was also offered. The Elan 1600 of 1963 was replaced by the Elan S2 in 1964. In 1965 the Type 36, a fixed-head coupe version of the car, was introduced, while in 1966 the drop-head coupe Type 26 was replaced by the Type 45. Both types, 36 and 45, were offered initially in S3 form, followed in 1968 in S4 form, and finally in 1970 as the Elan Sprint. Production of the Sprint ceased in 1973. The standard, STD, S2, S3 and S4 models were also available in a slightly more powerful and luxurious special equipment variant, generally referred to as the SE, for example Lotus Elan S3 SE. In the UK the Elan was offered as a fully assembled vehicle and, for tax avoidance purposes, as a lower-cost kit for final assembly by the customer. The total production number for the Lotus Elan is not definitively known, however John Bolster, in his book The Lotus Elan and Europa, A Collector's Guide, provides a number of 12,224, S13, 7,895, S4, 2,976, Sprint, 1,353. This number was occasionally used by Lotus itself. See below for +2 production. Meanwhile, Paul Robinshaw and Christopher Ross, in their book The Original 1962–1973 Lotus Elan, assert that Lotus' somewhat erratic record-keeping at the time meant that vehicle serial numbers were not entirely sequential or consistent. Their assessment suggests the actual count to be in the range 8,676 9,153, S1, 900, S2, 1,250, S3, 2,650, S4, 2,976 3,000, Sprint, 901,353. As of April 2018, the voluntary, and thus inevitably incomplete, Lotus Elan registry lists approximately 1,100 known remaining vehicles, including approximately 330 +2 models, in over 30 countries. The basic structure of the Lotus Elan comprised a fabricated mild steel backbone chassis, similar to a double-ended tuning fork, and a fiberglass body. The chassis was the primary stressed component, providing the necessary bending and torsional rigidity. The fiberglass body was solidly bolted to the chassis at 16 points, fitting over it like a saddle. While not highly stressed, the body nevertheless added to the overall rigidity of the structure. As such, the chassis should more properly be considered a subframe. It is readily changeable, and most Elans on the road today have had a new chassis fitted at some point, either due to accident or decay. The engine and gearbox are located between the front fork arms and the differential between the rear fork arms. The front and rear suspensions attach to the ends of their respective arms. Turrets at the end of the arms hold the suspension springs and dampers. This design resulted in lightweight, high rigidity, by contemporary standards, and easy passenger access through wide door openings with low sills. Driver and passenger protection from front and rear impact was acceptable for its time, but side impact protection was minimal. The engine, gearbox and differential were all sourced from Ford UK components. See below for details on the engine. The gearbox was a high-volume unit used widely across the Ford range, Anglia, Cortina, etc. Lotus offered regular and close ratio versions. The differential unit was also sourced from Ford but converted for independent rear suspension use. Contemporary Ford cars used live rear axles. 3 differential ratios were offered at various times during the production life of the vehicle: 3.55, 3.77 and 3.9. Most Elans were fitted with 3.77 differentials. 3.90 differentials, which provided the best acceleration, were often favored by purchasers of early cars, while 3.55 differentials became more common in later cars, especially the more powerful Sprints, to provide more relaxed cruising on newly built highways. The final drive used 4 Rotoflex couplings to connect the differential output shafts to the rear hubs. These rubber donut couplings were widely used at the time for road vehicles, for example Hillman Imp, Triumph GT6, and racing, for example Ford GT40, Lotus 21, prior to the availability of constant velocity, CV, joints. In the case of the Elan, which had exceptionally supple rear suspension that allowed significant vertical wheel travel, the deformation of the Rotoflexes in operation resulted in some wind-up of the couplings. This could be readily detected by the driver, especially at takeoff and during gear changes, and was slightly disconcerting when driving an Elan for the first time. In practice, drivers typically adjusted their clutch technique within a few minutes and no longer noticed it. In recent years, the uncertain quality of replacement Rotoflex couplings, combined with the availability of half shafts built with CV joints, has resulted in many Elans being converted from Rotoflex to CV joint drive.